The gunshot that tore through the stagecoach window sent splinters of wood exploding inward, and Josephine Kane felt the burn of lead slicing across her ribs before she heard the second explosion of pistol fire. The September afternoon in 1878 had been peaceful until the masked riders descended on the trail between Durango, Colorado, and the mining camps to the north, their horses kicking up dust that turned the mountain air thick and choking. Now blood soaked through the blue traveling dress she had worn for her journey, the fabric sticking to her side as she pressed against the leather seat, trying to make herself small while chaos erupted around her. The driver was already dead, his body tumbling from the high seat to land with a sickening thud on the rocky ground. The shotgun guard fired once, twice, then silence as he too fell. Inside the coach, the elderly woman across from Josephine screamed until one of the bandits yanked open the door and struck her across the face with his pistol. The woman crumpled, unconscious but breathing. Josephine felt rough hands grabbing at her reticule, tearing the small bag from her wrist. She wanted to fight back, but the pain in her side was spreading, hot and terrible, and when she looked down she saw crimson spreading across the pale blue fabric like spilled wine. "This one's been shot," a voice said, rough and unconcerned. "Leave her. She won't make it anyway." Then they were gone, thundering away with the strongbox and whatever valuables they had stripped from the passengers. The dust settled slowly, and Josephine found herself sitting in sudden, awful silence broken only by the labored breathing of the unconscious woman and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. She pressed her hand harder against her side, but the blood kept coming, warm and wet between her fingers. The mountains around her were beautiful, she thought distantly. The aspens were just beginning to turn gold, and the sky was that particular shade of blue that only existed at high altitude. It seemed a strange place to die. She did not know how long she sat there, growing colder despite the afternoon sun. Minutes, an hour. Time had lost meaning, become something fluid and uncertain. She thought about her mother back in Philadelphia, how she would receive the telegram. She thought about the teaching position waiting for her in Durango, the small schoolhouse she would never see. 22 years old, and this was how it ended, bleeding out in a stagecoach in the Colorado wilderness. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up, fear cutting through the fog of pain. Were they coming back? But no, this was a single horse, and when the rider came into view she saw he wore no mask. He was tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the sun, and when he saw the stagecoach he reined in his horse so hard it reared slightly. "Jesus Christ," she heard him say, and then he was swinging down from the saddle, his boots hitting the ground in a cloud of dust. He appeared at the coach door, and Josephine got her first clear look at him. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. His eyes, she noticed, were an unusual shade of gray-green, and right now they were wide with shock as they took in the scene inside the coach. "Madam," he said, and his voice was steadier than his expression. "Madam, can you hear me?" "Yes," Josephine managed, though her voice came out barely above a whisper. "The others." He was already checking the elderly woman's pulse, his fingers gentle on her wrist. "She's alive." Knocked out, but alive. He looked up at where the driver and guard had fallen, and something grim crossed his face. "The others didn't make it." Josephine nodded, or tried to. The movement made her side scream with pain, and she gasped. In an instant he was focused on her, his hands carefully moving her own away from the wound. She saw his jaw tighten as he took in the amount of blood. "How long ago did this happen?" "I don't know. An hour. Less. They took the strongbox and left." "Can you tell me your name?" "Josephine Kane." "Miss Kane, I'm Vincent Rourke. I'm going to help you, but first I need to see how bad this is. May I?" His hands were already reaching for the buttons of her traveling jacket, but he waited for her nod before continuing. She appreciated that, the courtesy even in crisis. He worked quickly but carefully, peeling back the blood-soaked fabric. The bullet had carved a furrow across her ribs, deep enough to bleed heavily, but as Vincent examined it, she saw some of the tension leave his shoulders. "You're lucky," he said. "It didn't go in. Cut you up pretty bad, but nothing vital hit. You're going to be all right, Miss Kane, but I need to stop this bleeding." He was already moving, striding to his horse and pulling supplies from his saddlebags. When he returned, he had strips of clean cloth, a canteen, and a small bottle of whiskey. "This is going to hurt," he warned her, and she barely had time to brace herself before he was pouring water over the wound. She bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out, tasting copper. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, and she believed him. His hands were gentle despite their size, his touch competent as he cleaned the wound as best he could. "Whiskey next. This will hurt worse." It did. The alcohol burned like fire, and this time she could not stop the cry that escaped her. Vincent's hand found hers, squeezed once, solid and warm. "I know, I'm sorry. Almost done." He worked with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this before, binding her ribs tightly with the clean cloth. When he finished, he helped her sit back, arranging her jacket around her shoulders for modesty and warmth. "Where were you headed?" he asked, settling himself in the coach doorway, his body positioned so he could watch both her and the surrounding terrain. "Durango. I'm meant to be the new school teacher." Something flickered across his face. "Durango's expecting you then. They'll have people out searching soon." "And you?" "Where were you going, Mr. Rourke?" "Vincent," he said. "Just Vincent. And I was headed nowhere in particular. I've been working cattle drives, just finished one up near Silverton. Was heading south thinking maybe Durango, maybe further. Hadn't decided yet." "Then I'm grateful you were undecided today." She tried to smile, but another wave of pain washed through her and she closed her eyes, breathing carefully. "Rest if you can," Vincent said. "I'm not going anywhere." The sun was moving lower, painting the peaks orange and gold when the elderly woman finally stirred. Vincent had checked on her several times, and now he helped her sit up slowly, speaking in the same calm voice he had used with Josephine. "Easy now, madam. You've had a knock on the head." The woman looked around wildly, then seemed to remember. Her hand went to her face where a bruise was already darkening. "They robbed us, those men." "They're gone," Vincent assured her. "Can you tell me your name, Martha Willis? I'm going to visit my daughter in Durango." She saw Josephine then, saw the blood, and her eyes widened. "Oh, my dear, are you all right?" "I will be," Josephine said, and found she actually believed it. Something about Vincent's steady presence made it easier to believe. He got Martha settled more comfortably, gave her water from his canteen, checked the knot on her head. All the while, Josephine noticed, he kept his awareness on their surroundings, his eyes regularly scanning the rocks and trees. His rifle was propped within easy reach. "You think they might come back?" she asked quietly. Vincent shook his head. "Unlikely. They got what they wanted, but I don't believe in taking chances." As if to emphasize his point, he shifted position so he was more clearly visible from the road, his body between them and any potential threat. It was getting colder now as the sun sank behind the peaks, and Josephine shivered despite her jacket. Without a word, Vincent shrugged out of his own coat and draped it around her shoulders. It smelled like leather and horse and something else, something clean like pine. "You'll be cold," she protested weakly. "I'll manage." And he would, she could see that. There was something solid about him, something reliable that went beyond his physical presence. Full dark had fallen when they finally heard the sound of multiple horses. Vincent was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, positioned in front of the coach. "Stay quiet," he said softly, but these were not bandits. The riders carried torches, and as they came closer, Josephine heard someone calling out, "Hallu, Durango search party." Vincent lowered his rifle and stepped forward, waving. "Here. The stagecoach is here." What followed was a confusion of activity. The search party consisted of the town sheriff, a deputy, and half a dozen armed citizens. They took in the scene quickly, their faces grim as they found the bodies of the driver and guard. The sheriff, a weathered man named Tom Hendricks, questioned Vincent while a doctor from the party examined both Josephine and Martha. "This man saved our lives," Josephine told the sheriff when he came to speak with her. The doctor was rebandaging her wound with proper supplies, his movements brisk but thorough. "If he hadn't come along when he did, I would have bled to death." Sheriff Hendricks looked at Vincent with new respect. "Good work, son. You new to these parts." "Just passing through," Vincent said. "Or I was." "Well, you picked a hell of a day to pass through. Any chance you'd consider staying long enough to help track these bastards?" The sheriff spat to the side. "Pardon my language, ladies, but this is the third robbery in 2 months. We need to put a stop to it." Vincent's eyes found Josephine's across the space between them. She saw something in his expression, a question, maybe, or a decision being weighed. "I'll stay," he said finally, "until they're caught." They buried the driver and guard there by the side of the road, and Josephine thought it was terribly sad, these men dying in the line of duty and getting only a rough grave in the wilderness. But the sheriff promised their families would be notified and compensated, and there was nothing more to be done. Martha was helped onto one of the search party's horses, while another man insisted on carrying Josephine, concerned about her wound. "I can ride," Vincent said quietly to the man. "If the lady doesn't object, I'll take her. My horse is steady." Josephine should have objected. It was improper, riding with a strange man pressed against him for the hours it would take to reach Durango. But when she opened her mouth to protest, what came out was, "Thank you, Vincent." He lifted her as carefully as if she were made of glass, settling her sideways on his horse before swinging up behind her. His arm came around her waist, holding her secure, and she found herself leaning back against his chest, too tired and sore to care about propriety. The ride to Durango was long and uncomfortable, but Vincent kept his horse to a steady walk, avoiding the worst of the rocks and ruts. He talked to her sometimes, quiet words about nothing important, and she realized he was trying to keep her awake, to make sure she didn't slip into unconsciousness. "Tell me about Philadelphia," he said at one point. So she did, describing the crowded streets and tall buildings, the factories and the railway yards. She told him about her father, a clerk who had died 3 years ago, and her mother who took in sewing to make ends meet. She told him about the teaching college she had attended, scrimping and saving for every semester. "And now you're here," Vincent said, "long way from home." "I wanted to do something meaningful, help children learn, give them opportunities." She paused. "It sounds naive, doesn't it?" "No." His voice was firm. "It sounds brave." She wanted to ask him about himself, about where he came from and what brought him to Colorado, but exhaustion was dragging at her. She felt his arm tighten slightly around her waist, heard him say something to the sheriff about her needing rest. And then there was just the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her and Vincent's heartbeat against her back. She woke briefly when they reached Durango. The town was dark except for lights in a few windows, and she had an impression of rough buildings and wide streets before she was being carried inside somewhere warm. A woman's voice, kind but brisk, was giving orders. She felt herself being laid on something soft, and then Vincent's voice close to her ear. "You're safe now, Miss Kane. The doctor's going to look after you." She wanted to thank him again, wanted to ask him not to leave, but sleep was pulling her under and she could not form the words. Morning came with sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee. Josephine opened her eyes to find herself in a small, neat room, lying in a real bed with clean sheets. Her side ached fiercely, but when she carefully felt through her nightgown, she found fresh bandages. Someone had undressed her, washed her, tended her wounds. The memory of the previous day came back in pieces, and with it the memory of Vincent Rourke. The door opened and a woman entered, middle-aged with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Oh good, you're awake. I'm Margaret Hendricks, the sheriff's wife. You're in our home, dear. The doctor said you need rest and care, and since you're new to town with no place of your own yet, well, we couldn't very well leave you at the boarding house." Josephine tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Margaret was there in an instant, helping her arrange pillows. "Easy now. You lost a lot of blood yesterday. You're going to be weak for a while. Thank you for taking me in. I don't know how to repay you." Margaret waved this away. "Nonsense. You're going to be our school teacher. We look after our own in Durango. Now, are you hungry? The doctor said you should eat when you woke up." She was hungry, she realized, ravenously so. Margaret brought her broth and bread, and while Josephine ate, the older woman filled her in on what had happened after she lost consciousness. "That young man who found you, Vincent Rourke, he rode in with you and didn't leave until the doctor assured him 3 times that you'd be all right. He's staying at the boarding house, and he's agreed to help Sheriff Hendricks track down the gang that's been robbing our stages." "He was very kind," Josephine said quietly. "More than kind. Doc says if he hadn't bandaged you up when he did, you might not have made it." Margaret refilled her water glass. "Tom says he's a good man, knows his way around the territory. Used to work as a ranch hand over near Cheyenne, apparently. Lost his family young, been on his own since he was 17 or so." Josephine wanted to ask more, but Margaret was already standing, gathering up the dishes. "You rest now. I'll check on you in a bit, and Doc will be by this afternoon to change those bandages." The days that followed developed a rhythm. The doctor, a gruff but competent man named Ezra Walsh, came twice daily to check her wound. It was healing well, he said. No infection setting in, but she needed to stay in bed and rest. Margaret brought her meals and sat with her sometimes, telling her about the town and the school. "We've got about 30 children of learning age," Margaret explained. "Some of them are ranch children who board in town during the week. The school building is small, but it's sound. The last teacher, Miss Peterson, she married one of the miners and moved to Silverton. We've been without a teacher for 3 months now." Josephine was eager to start, but her body had other ideas. Just walking to the wash basin left her dizzy and breathless. It was frustrating, being trapped in bed when there was work to be done, a life to start building on the 4th day. There was a knock at her door, and Margaret showed in Vincent Rourke. He stood just inside the doorway, hat in his hands, looking uncertain in a way he hadn't looked even in the crisis of the robbery. He had cleaned up, she noticed. Shaved, gotten a haircut, found clean clothes. He looked younger without the trail dust and stubble, and she found herself thinking he was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all sharp angles and serious eyes. "Miss Kane," he said, "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to see how you were healing." "Not at all. Please sit." She gestured to the chair beside the bed, suddenly very aware that she was in a nightgown with only a shawl around her shoulders, her hair in a simple braid. Not exactly how she wanted to receive visitors, but there was nothing to be done about it. Vincent sat, still holding his hat, turning it in his hands. "You look better, more color in your face." "I feel better, thank you. Thanks to you. Dr. Walsh says I was very lucky you knew what to do." My mother was a nurse, Vincent said, before she married my father. She taught me some things, basic care. I'm glad it was enough. They talked for a while, careful conversation that danced around deeper topics. He told her the sheriff's posse had found tracks leading north into the mountains, but lost them in the rocky terrain. They would try again, keep looking. She told him about her plans for the school, her nervousness about meeting the children. "You'll be wonderful," Vincent said with such certainty that she found herself believing him. He came back the next day and the day after that. Sometimes he brought small things, wildflowers he had picked on his morning ride, a book he thought she might enjoy from the general store. They talked more easily now, the conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic. She learned he had grown up on a small ranch in Wyoming, that his parents had died in a scarlet fever outbreak when he was 16, that he had been drifting since, taking work where he could find it. "Never seemed like there was any point in putting down roots," he said. "Nothing to tie me to one place over another." "That sounds lonely," Josephine said softly. Vincent looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "It was," he said, "but I got used to it." By the end of the first week, she was allowed to get up and move around the house, though Dr. Walsh still forbade any strenuous activity. Margaret helped her dress in one of the simple dresses that had been salvaged from her trunk, the one piece of luggage that had made it through the robbery intact. Josephine felt almost human again, standing in front of the mirror and pinning up her hair. Vincent was in the kitchen when she came downstairs, sitting at the table and drinking coffee with Sheriff Hendricks. Both men stood when they saw her, and she saw Vincent's eyes widen slightly. "Miss Kane," he said, "it's good to see you up and about. It feels good to be up." "I was going mad lying in that bed." She accepted a chair and the cup of coffee Margaret pressed into her hands. "Any news on the robbers?" The sheriff shook his head. "They're lying low or they've moved on, but we'll keep looking. Men like that, they always make a mistake eventually." Vincent was quiet, his eyes on his coffee cup. Josephine noticed the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his mouth. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up, seemed to debate with himself, then spoke. "There's talk they might hit the payroll wagon coming in from Denver next week. It's carrying money for the miners, 3 months' worth of wages." "Will there be guards?" Josephine asked, alarmed. "Armed escort, but that hasn't stopped them before." The sheriff drained his coffee and stood. "We're setting up an ambush, extra men hiding in the rocks. If they try for it, we'll be ready." After the sheriff left, Vincent lingered. Margaret, with the tact of a woman who understood more than she let on, found reasons to be busy in other parts of the house. Josephine and Vincent sat at the kitchen table, the silence between them comfortable now. "You're going with them," Josephine said. It was not a question. "Yes, it's dangerous. So is doing nothing." Vincent's hands were wrapped around his coffee cup, his knuckles white. "Those men killed the driver and guard. They nearly killed you. If I can help stop them, I have to try." Josephine understood, but that did not make it easier. Somewhere in the past week, Vincent Rourke had become important to her, more important than made any logical sense. She barely knew him, yet the thought of him riding into danger made her chest tight with fear. "Promise me you'll be careful," she said quietly. Vincent's eyes met hers, and she saw her own feelings reflected there, surprise and uncertainty and something warmer, something growing. "I promise," he said. The day of the ambush, Josephine could not settle. She tried to read, to help Margaret with household tasks, but her mind kept drifting north to the pass where the payroll wagon would come through. Vincent had left before dawn, and she had not even been able to say goodbye, had only known he was gone when Margaret mentioned it at breakfast. The hours crawled by. Margaret, seeing her distress, tried to distract her with talk of the school, with planning and preparations. The building had been cleaned and readied, supplies ordered. Josephine could start teaching as soon as Dr. Walsh cleared her, probably another week. "That Vincent is a good man," Margaret said, seemingly out of nowhere. They were sitting on the porch enjoying the September sunshine. "Tom says he's one of the best trackers he's ever seen, knows how to handle himself." "I'm glad," Josephine said, though the words felt inadequate. Margaret gave her a knowing look. "He's sweet on you, you know. A blind person could see it." Josephine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes that's all it takes. One look, one moment, and you just know." Margaret smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "I knew with Tom. He was new to town, just hired as deputy, and I was helping my father at the general store. He came in to buy supplies and dropped a whole jar of pickles when he saw me. Made the most terrible mess. I knew right then he was going to be trouble, the best kind of trouble." "And if he doesn't come back," Josephine's voice was barely a whisper. "Then we'll grieve," Margaret said practically. "But don't borrow tomorrow's sorrow today. Have faith." It was late afternoon when they heard the thunder of hoofbeats. Josephine was on her feet instantly, ignoring the pull of half-healed muscles, rushing to the porch railing. A group of riders was coming down the main street, and her heart stopped until she saw Vincent among them, sitting tall in the saddle, very much alive. The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. She gripped the railing, watching as the riders stopped in front of the sheriff's office. There were prisoners, she saw, 3 men with their hands bound being pulled roughly from their horses. The townsfolk were gathering, drawn by the commotion. Vincent dismounted, spoke briefly with the sheriff, then his eyes swept the street and found her standing on the porch. Even from a distance, she saw the relief in his expression mirror her own. He started toward the house, his stride long and purposeful. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at her. There was dirt on his face, powder burns on his sleeve, but he was whole and safe in here. "Miss Kane," he said, "Vincent." She wanted to run down the steps to throw herself at him, but propriety and her healing wound kept her in place. "You're all right. Thank God you're all right. We got them. All of them. There was shooting, but nobody on our side was hit. The stolen money and goods are recovered." He climbed the steps slowly, stopping just in front of her. "I'm sorry if you were worried." "I was terrified," she admitted. Something shifted in his expression. His hand came up, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. "I came back," he said softly. "I promised I would be careful, and I kept that promise." Josephine turned her face into his palm, propriety forgotten. "I'm so glad." They stood there for a long moment, the world narrowing to just the two of them, and Josephine knew with absolute certainty that Margaret had been right. One moment, and you just know. She knew that this man, this drifter who had been passing through with no destination in mind, had become essential to her in a way that defied logic and reason. The trial of the robbers was swift, frontier justice being what it was. They were sentenced to hang, and Josephine did not attend the execution, though she heard the church bell toll that morning. She was glad justice was done, but she had no stomach for watching men die, even men who had nearly killed her. Dr. Walsh cleared her to start teaching, and she threw herself into preparations. The schoolhouse was small but charming, with windows that looked out on the mountains and a pot-bellied stove for heat. The desks were rough but serviceable, and there were books, not many but enough. She spent days planning lessons, organizing materials, making the space her own. Vincent helped, appearing with tools to fix a wobbly desk, to replace a cracked window pane. He never said much as he worked, but his presence was a comfort, solid and reassuring. Sometimes she would look up from her planning to find him watching her, and the heat in his gaze made her pulse quicken. They were dancing around something, both of them aware but neither quite brave enough to name it. Until the evening before school was set to start, when Vincent walked her home from the schoolhouse through the gathering dusk. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "About tomorrow?" "Terrified," she admitted. "What if they hate me? What if I'm terrible at this?" "You won't be. You're going to be wonderful, Josephine." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his low voice sent warmth through her. "Those children are lucky to have you." They had reached the sheriff's house, but Josephine did not want the evening to end. "Walk with me a bit longer," she asked. "Just to the end of the street and back." Vincent offered her his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him through the fabric of his shirt. The town was quiet around them, lamps being lit in windows, the smell of dinners cooking. It was peaceful, domestic, and Josephine found herself imagining a future here, roots growing deep. "What will you do now?" she asked. "The robbers are caught, the town is safe. Will you move on?" Vincent was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I've been asking myself the same thing. Before I found that stagecoach, I would have said yes. I would have collected my pay from the sheriff and ridden on, found the next job, the next town. That was my life, never staying anywhere long enough to care. And now," he stopped walking, turned to face her. In the fading light, his eyes were very green. "Now I think maybe I've been running towards something instead of away. I just didn't know what it was until I found it." Josephine's heart was pounding. "What did you find, Vincent?" "You." The word was simple, honest. "I found you bleeding and brave in that stagecoach, and everything changed. I can't explain it, Josephine. I don't have pretty words or poetry. But I know that the thought of leaving Durango, of leaving you, feels wrong in a way I can't describe." "Then don't leave," she whispered. "Stay. I have nothing to offer you. No property, no prospects. I've got some money saved, enough to get by for a while, but I'm just a hired hand, a drifter. You're an educated woman, a teacher. You deserve so much more than that." Josephine reached up, cupping his face in her hands, feeling the rasp of evening stubble against her palms. "I deserve to be happy. And you make me happy, Vincent Rourke. These past 2 weeks, getting to know you, I've felt more alive than I have in years. Don't tell me what I deserve. Let me decide that for myself." His hands came to rest on her waist, gentle as they had been when he bandaged her wounds. "Are you sure? Because if I stay, if I let myself hope, I don't think I could bear to lose you." "Then don't lose me. Stay. Build something here with me." She was being forward, improper, but she did not care. Life was too short, too uncertain. The bullet that had carved across her ribs had taught her that. Vincent's answer was to pull her close and kiss her, soft and careful as if she might break. Josephine sighed against his mouth, her arms going around his neck, and the kiss deepened, becoming something more. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I'll stay," he said. "God help me, I'll stay." The first day of school was everything Josephine had hoped and feared. The children arrived in groups, some shy, some bold, all curious about the new teacher. They ranged in age from 6 to 14, miners' children and ranchers' children, sitting side by side at the rough desks. She taught them reading and arithmetic, history and geography. And by the end of the day, her voice was hoarse, but her heart was full. Vincent was waiting outside when she dismissed the class, leaning against the fence and whittling a piece of wood. The children streamed past him, and she saw several of them stop to talk, easy and friendly. He was becoming part of the town, she realized, putting down roots whether he knew it or not. "How was it?" he asked when she finally emerged, tired but smiling. "Wonderful. Exhausting." One of the older boys tried to put a frog in the water bucket, and 2 of the girls spent the entire arithmetic lesson arguing about whose turn it was to use the slate. "But wonderful." Vincent laughed, and the sound warmed her. Sounds like teaching is everything you hoped. It is. She looked up at him, this man who had saved her life and stolen her heart. And what about you? What did you do today? Met with a man named Robert Chambers. He owns a ranch about 10 miles south of here, raises cattle and horses. He's looking for a foreman, someone to manage his operation. We talked for 3 hours. Vincent paused and she saw nervousness in his eyes. He offered me the job. Good pay, a house on the property, percentage of the profits. Josephine's breath caught. Vincent, that's wonderful. Did you accept? I told him I needed to talk to someone first. To you. He set down his whittling, took her hands in his. The house, it's small but solid. 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen. There's a barn and a paddock, room for a garden, room for a family eventually if things worked out that way. Are you asking me what I think you're asking me? Vincent dropped to one knee right there in the schoolyard, still holding her hands. I don't have a ring yet, and this isn't romantic, and I'm probably doing this all wrong. But Josephine Kane, I love you. I've loved you since I saw you sitting in that stagecoach, hurt and scared but not broken, braver than anyone I've ever known. Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I can be the man you deserve. Tears were streaming down Josephine's face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Yes, yes, Vincent, I'll marry you. He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her once before remembering her still healing wound and setting her down gently. I'm sorry, I forgot. Did I hurt you? No. She was laughing and crying at the same time. I'm fine. More than fine. I'm so happy I could burst. They were married 4 weeks later in Durango's small church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Josephine wore a dress of cream-colored silk, simple but elegant, that Margaret had helped her sew. Vincent stood at the altar in a new suit, looking uncomfortable in the formal clothes but impossibly handsome. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Vincent kissed her, the congregation cheered. The ranch house was everything Vincent had described and more. Small, yes, but cozy and well-built, with a view of the mountains that took Josephine's breath away. They moved her few possessions in, and Vincent showed her the bedroom he had already furnished with a new bed frame and mattress, a wardrobe for her clothes. I've been working on it, he admitted, almost shy. Wanted it to be ready for you. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Vincent's gentleness balanced by his passion. Josephine had been nervous, but Vincent made her feel cherished, desired, loved. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, she felt more at home than she ever had in Philadelphia. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For finding me. For saving me. For giving me this life. Vincent's arms tightened around her. Thank you for letting me stay. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Josephine continued teaching, riding into town each morning and back each evening. Vincent threw himself into his work at the ranch, proving Robert Chambers' faith in him by improving operations and increasing profits. The older man was delighted with his new foreman, and he and his wife Margaret, yes, another Margaret, became fast friends with the newlyweds. Winter came to the Colorado mountains, transforming the landscape into something beautiful and harsh. The ride to town became treacherous, and there were days when Josephine could not make it, days when she and Vincent were snowed in together. She did not mind. Those were her favorite days, actually, quiet hours by the fire while the wind howled outside. It was on one such day in January that Josephine realized her monthly courses were late. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed. But another week passed, and then another, and the nausea that came with her morning coffee was impossible to ignore. Vincent, she said one evening as they sat together, his head in her lap while she read aloud. Vincent, I think I might be with child. He sat up so fast he nearly knocked the book from her hands. "Truly, you're certain?" "Not certain, not yet, but all the signs are there." She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. "If I'm right, come summer we'll be 3 instead of 2. The joy on his face was everything. He pulled her into his arms, careful despite his excitement, and she felt him shaking. "A baby. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy." "Josephine, I didn't think I could be any happier than I was the day you married me, but I was wrong. You, our child, it's more than I ever dreamed of having." Dr. Walsh confirmed it 2 weeks later. The baby would come in August, he said, and Josephine was healthy and strong. She should continue teaching as long as she felt able, but take care not to overdo it. She taught through the spring, her belly growing round beneath her dresses. The children were endlessly fascinated by the baby, the older girls especially wanting to feel it kick. Vincent was protective to the point of being overbearing, constantly worried she was working too hard, doing too much. She loved him for it even as she insisted she was fine. In May, she reluctantly gave up teaching for the summer, training a young woman named Sarah Mitchell to take over in the fall while she recovered from childbirth. It was hard to step back, but she knew it was necessary. Besides, there was plenty to do at the ranch. She spent her time preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, arranging the second bedroom as a nursery. Vincent surprised her one evening by carrying in a beautiful cradle, handmade from smooth pine. "I've been working on it in the barn," he said, setting it gently by their bed. Wanted it to be perfect. Josephine ran her hands over the wood, feeling the care in every smooth joint, every careful curve. "It's beautiful. You made this." "My father taught me woodworking when I was young. I haven't done it in years, but I remembered enough." He knelt beside her, his hand joining hers on the cradle. "I want our child to have everything, Josephine. Everything I didn't have. Security, love, a real home. They'll have all that and more," she promised, "because they'll have you for a father." The summer heat was oppressive when the pain started, late on an August afternoon. Josephine was folding laundry when the first contraction hit, stealing her breath. Vincent took one look at her face and was in motion, riding hard for town to fetch Dr. Walsh and Margaret Hendricks. By the time they returned, Josephine was in active labor, the pains coming hard and fast. Margaret took charge with the competence of a woman who had birthed 4 children of her own, while Vincent hovered anxiously until Dr. Walsh ordered him outside. "But I want to stay with her," Vincent protested. "This is women's work," the doctor said firmly. "You'll just be in the way. Go boil water, pace the porch, whatever you need to do. We'll call you when it's over." The labor was long and difficult. Night fell and still the baby did not come. Josephine was exhausted, drenched in sweat, crying out with each contraction. Through it all, Margaret stayed by her side, offering sips of water, words of encouragement. "You're doing so well, dear. Just a little more. The baby's almost here." Finally, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, Josephine gave one last tremendous push and felt the baby slip free. There was a moment of terrible silence, and then a cry, thin and indignant, filled the room. "A boy," Dr. Walsh announced, holding up the red, squalling infant. "A healthy boy." Josephine collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. A boy. They had a son. Margaret cleaned the baby quickly and efficiently, then placed him in Josephine's arms. He was so small, so perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. "Can Vincent come in?" Josephine asked. "I want him to see." Margaret smiled and went to the door. "You can come in now, Mr. Rourke. Come meet your son." Vincent entered slowly, his face pale, his eyes red-rimmed as if he had been crying. When he saw Josephine holding the baby, Something in his expression broke and reformed, and he crossed to the bed in 3 long strides. "Josephine, are you all right? Is he all right?" "We're both fine. Look at him, Vincent. Look at our son." Vincent sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his eyes locked on the baby. Tentatively, as if afraid he might break something precious, he reached out and touched the tiny hand. Immediately, the baby's fingers curled around his, gripping tight, and Vincent made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He's so small, so perfect." He looked at Josephine, his eyes shining. Thank you for him, for everything." They named him Thomas Vincent Rourke, Thomas for the sheriff who had helped them and Vincent for his father. Tommy, they called him, and he was the center of their world. Vincent proved to be a devoted father, patient and gentle despite his size. Josephine would find him sometimes in the middle of the night, sitting in the rocking chair with Tommy in his arms, just watching the baby sleep with an expression of such wonder it made her heart ache. She returned to teaching when Tommy was 3 months old, taking him with her to the schoolhouse. The children were delighted, the girls fighting over who got to hold him during recess. He was a good baby, content to sleep in his basket while Josephine taught, only fussing when he was hungry or needed changing. The years flowed by, each one bringing changes. Tommy grew from baby to toddler to little boy, bright and curious like his mother, steady and kind like his father. When he was 3, Josephine found herself pregnant again, and this time the labor was easier, quicker. They welcomed a daughter, Emily Rose, with Josephine's auburn hair and Vincent's green eyes. 2 children became 3 when their youngest, Daniel, was born just before Tommy's 7th birthday. The house that had seemed so spacious was suddenly full of noise and laughter. Toys scattered across the floor, small voices calling for Mama and Papa. Vincent proved as skilled a rancher as he was a father. Under his management, the Chambers Ranch prospered, and Robert Chambers rewarded him with increased pay and responsibilities. When the old man died suddenly of a heart ailment, his widow Margaret sold Vincent a portion of the land at a generous price, allowing him to start his own operation. "Vincent Rourke, rancher," Josephine said, reading the deed. "It has a good sound to it." "Vincent Rourke, husband and father," he corrected, pulling her into his arms. "That sounds better." They built slowly, carefully, adding cattle and horses, hiring a few hands to help with the work. Josephine cut back on teaching, taking only the older students, wanting to spend more time at home with her growing children. The schoolhouse felt like a different life sometimes, though she still loved it. Tommy was 10 when he asked his father about the scar on his mother's side, the puckered line that was barely visible but still there. Vincent looked at Josephine, a question in his eyes, and she nodded. Their children were old enough to know the story. So Vincent told them. All 3 children gathered around the kitchen table, about the Stagecoach Robbery and the wounded teacher he had found bleeding in the September heat. He told them about bandaging her wounds, about standing guard through the long afternoon, about falling in love with the brave woman who had refused to give up. "So Mama was shot?" Emily asked, wide-eyed. "By bad men?" "Yes," Vincent said seriously, "but she survived and the bad men were caught. And I met your mother, which means I got to have all of you, so something terrible became something wonderful." Tommy was quiet, processing this. Then he said, "You saved her life." "And she saved mine," Vincent said, reaching across the table to take Josephine's hand. "I was lost before I found her, wandering with no purpose. Your mama gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something that would last. She saved me just as surely as I saved her." The children grew, as children do. Tommy developed his father's love of ranching, spending every spare moment working with the cattle and horses. Emily proved to have her mother's scholarly bent, always with her nose in a book, dreaming of becoming a teacher herself. Daniel, the baby, was the wild one, full of energy and mischief, keeping them all on their toes. There were hard times mixed with the good. A drought one summer that nearly bankrupted them, saved only by Vincent's careful management and a loan from the bank that took years to repay. A winter when Emily contracted pneumonia and they nearly lost her, days of terror until the fever finally broke. But they weathered every storm together, their love and commitment never wavering. Josephine was 43 when she finally stopped teaching altogether, handing the school over to Emily, now 21 and freshly graduated from the teaching college in Denver. It was strange at first, not riding into town each morning, but she quickly found ways to fill her time. She had grandchildren now, Tommy having married a rancher's daughter named Anna and produced 2 children in quick succession. Vincent was 50, his dark hair liberally streaked with gray, his face weathered from years in the sun. But to Josephine, he was as handsome as the day he had knelt in her stagecoach and promised to help her. More so, perhaps, because she knew now what she had only sensed then, that this man was solid all the way through, someone she could trust with her life and her heart. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and rose when Vincent said, "Do you ever think about that day, the robbery?" "Sometimes," Josephine admitted. "Not as much as I used to." "Why?" "I was just thinking, if I had ridden a different road that day, if I had decided to go west instead of south, I would have missed you. We would have never met. You might have died in that stagecoach, or maybe someone else would have found you, and either way I would have gone on drifting, never knowing what I had missed." Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder. "But you didn't take a different road. You found me, and we built this life together. That's what matters." "I used to think it was luck," Vincent said, "or chance. Now I think maybe it was meant to be, like all the roads I traveled, all the choices I made, they were leading me to you." "That's quite romantic for a crusty old rancher," Josephine teased. Vincent laughed. "I learned from the best." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge one by one. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren playing, Anna calling them to supper. It was a good life, Josephine thought. Not the one she had imagined when she left Philadelphia all those years ago, but so much better than anything she could have dreamed. "Vincent," she said quietly, "thank you." "For what?" "For stopping, for helping, for staying, for loving me." She turned to look at him, this man who had been her savior and her partner, the father of her children and the love of her life. "For everything." Vincent cupped her face in his hands, weathered and work-roughened but infinitely gentle. "Josie," he said, using the nickname he had given her years ago, "loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done. Thank you for letting me." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Josephine thought about the girl she had been, bleeding and afraid in a stagecoach, not knowing that salvation was riding toward her. That girl had been so scared, so uncertain about the future. If she could go back and tell her younger self that everything would work out, that the cowboy bandaging her wounds would become her whole world, would she even believe it? Probably not. But that was all right. Some things you had to live to understand. Some stories had to unfold in their own time. Daniel graduated from school and announced he wanted to study law in Denver. Emily married a banker's son and moved to Durango, still teaching but now with a family of her own. Tommy took over more and more of the ranch operations as Vincent slowed down, though the old man, as Tommy affectionately called him, refused to fully retire. "I'll retire when I'm dead," Vincent said. "Besides, what would I do with myself? Sit around and get soft?" Josephine rolled her eyes. "You could spend time with me, you stubborn man. I spend every night with you, and most mornings, and every meal when I'm not out on the range. But he made more of an effort after that, taking time in the afternoons to sit with her, to talk and read and simply be together. They were 65 and 62, respectively, when the telegram came. Daniel, their youngest, was getting married in Denver and wanted them to come for the wedding. It would be Josephine's first time back east of the mountains since she had left Philadelphia at 22, her first time on a train in over 40 years. The journey was strange and wonderful, the landscape flying past the train windows. Denver was huge compared to Durango, bustling and modern in ways that made Josephine's head spin. But Daniel was radiant, and his bride, a lawyer like himself, was lovely and smart. The wedding was beautiful, held in a grand hotel that would have impressed even Philadelphia society. "Our baby," Vincent said, watching Daniel dance with his new wife. "All grown up and married. How did that happen?" "The same way everything happens," Josephine said, "one day at a time without us noticing." They stayed in Denver for 2 weeks, meeting Daniel's friends and colleagues, seeing the sights. But both of them were relieved when it was time to return to Durango, to the mountains and the ranch and the life they had built. "I'm too old for big cities," Vincent declared as they settled back into their own bed. "Give me wide, open spaces and clean air." "Agreed," Josephine said, curling into his side. Though it was nice to see Daniel so happy. "All our children are happy," Vincent said. "We did all right, didn't we?" "As parents, we did more than all right. We raised good, kind, successful children. We should be proud." And they were. As the years continued to pass, as their grandchildren grew and had children of their own, Vincent and Josephine watched with satisfaction. The ranch Tommy ran was prosperous, employing a dozen hands and supporting multiple families. Emily's school was considered one of the best in the region. Daniel had built a successful law practice and was talking about running for office. "All because you stopped to help a wounded woman on a mountain road," Josephine said one evening. They were in their 70s now, both moving slower, Vincent's joints aching with arthritis, Josephine's eyes requiring spectacles for reading. But they were still here, still together. "Best decision I ever made," Vincent said. "Well, second best. First was agreeing to marry you. I seem to recall I was the one who had to convince you that you were good enough for me. You did. I'm a slow learner." He took her hand, the way he had 1,000 times before, his thumb rubbing across her knuckles. "But I learn." They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with all 3 children, all 7 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren in attendance. It was chaos and noise and wonderful, the house and yard overflowing with family. Tommy made a toast, Emily organized games for the children, Daniel gave a speech that had everyone laughing and crying. 50 years, Vincent said when everyone had finally left and they were alone again. "Half a century with you, Josie, and it still doesn't feel like enough time." "We'll have more," Josephine said firmly. "We're not done yet." And they weren't. They had 5 more years, 5 more precious years of sunsets and grandchildren and quiet mornings over coffee. 5 more years of Vincent's hand finding hers in the dark, of Josephine's head on his shoulder as they sat on the porch. 5 more years of the love that had started in a moment of crisis and grown into something unshakable. Vincent died in his sleep at 78, peacefully, with no pain. Josephine woke to find him still and cold beside her, and the grief was crushing, total. She had known this day would come, had dreaded it, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of a world without Vincent in it. But she was not alone. Her children surrounded her, supported her, loved her through the worst of the grief. And gradually, slowly, she found a way to keep living. She told stories about their father to the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, wanting them to know the man he had been. She kept the ranch running with Tommy's help, because she knew Vincent would have wanted that. And on quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and look out at the mountains, at the land she and Vincent had made their own, and she would remember. Remember the day a young cowboy had stopped to help a wounded teacher. Remember the way he had looked at her, even then, with something like wonder. Remember 55 years of love and laughter and hard work and family. "Thank you," she would whisper to the wind, to the mountains, to the memory of the man she had loved. "Thank you for stopping. Thank you for everything." Josephine Kane Rourke died peacefully at 87, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Vincent had created. Her last words, whispered to Emily who sat holding her hand, were simple. "Tell him I'm coming. Tell your father I'm on my way." They buried her next to Vincent on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under an aspen tree that turned gold every autumn. The whole town of Durango turned out for the funeral, testament to the impact she had made as a teacher and a member of the community. But the words on her headstone were simple, chosen by her children. Josephine Kane Rourke, 1856–1943, beloved wife, mother. Teacher, she was brave, and beneath it, on Vincent's stone. Vincent Rourke, 1853–1931, beloved husband, father, rancher. He stopped because that was how it had started, really. One man stopping to help a wounded woman. One moment of compassion that had changed everything. One choice that had led to a lifetime of love, to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, to a legacy that would endure for generations. The ranch still stood, run now by Tommy's children. The school still taught, with Emily's granddaughter now holding the position. And in Durango, Colorado, old-timers would still sometimes tell the story of the teacher who was shot in a stagecoach robbery, and the cowboy who saved her life, and the love story that followed. It had become part of the town's history, part of its identity, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best things, that tragedy can transform into triumph, that one act of kindness can ripple out in ways we can never predict. And high on that hillside, under the aspen tree, 2 simple headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of 2 people who had loved each other completely, who had built a life together from nothing, who had proved that sometimes, just sometimes, stopping to help a stranger can change everything. The wind moved through the aspen leaves, making them whisper and dance, and if you listened very carefully, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting and the mountains were painted gold, you might almost hear the echo of laughter, the murmur of voices, the sound of 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and refused to let go. That was their story. That was their legacy. And it endured as true love always does, long after they were gone.